Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Detroit Tigers. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins return home after a long road trip, only managing to take 1 of 3 from the Tigers. Some bad baseball here. It wasn't just that they lost 2 games, Dan, is that it was some bad baseball.
How much of it was that it was really cold in game 1? Like, can we blame the cold weather? We got a lot of guys on here who came from warm weather places, right? Byron Buxton's from Georgia. A lot of these guys are from South America or the Caribbean. So can we blame it on that a little bit?
On that note, we have a Canadian on the team, in Eddie Julien. He was the most dressed on the team. You would think if you grew up in Canada, 38 degrees shouldn't be that, shocking to you. I would have expected him to be in short sleeves, but he's out there basically wearing a parka. No wonder he was booting the ball all over the place.
Oh, Canada.
But don't you dress for the weather? I mean, like Byron Buxton, it was like eye slots. Like that was like all he had. A lot of these guys were like that. It was cold. You're booting balls. But at the same time, and we'll talk about the many Tiger miscues. Like the Tigers were making mistakes too here. So we can't just pin it on that weather. But man, that's really what stood out to me was like, this was baseball in January or something like that. And I mean that from a developmental quality of baseball standpoint.
It basically equated to guys getting off the couch after they'd been down for 3 months trying to field baseball.
Absolutely. Like it was a ridiculous quality of play. We're going to get to that in the grade, David. I don't know if Anyway, the Twins do lose 2 of 3 to the Tigers at home. David, they are 7-13 on the season. Cleveland, 16-6. Kansas City, 13-9. Detroit here, 12-10. White Sox, who are coming up next, 3-18. This, David, I think just might be a bad baseball team. Can we just say that?
Okay, we can't get into that now, Dan. I'm sure there's lots of time for us to talk about the quality of this team and what their odds are to make the postseason or even finish the season, honestly. There's a chance, Dan, that the MLB just shuts it down and says, you know what, A's, White Sox, Twins, I don't know who's the 4th worst team in the league. You're all just
Well,
done
if you were a soccer guy, we could talk about relegation here, right? Like if there was a lower level of baseball. Well, there's AAA.
AAA. We've talked about this. It would be fascinating, but there's no way in the way that the teams are developed and structured for that to happen. Enough, Dan.
All right.
We are off topic. Let's jump into the series recap.
Series recap.
Oof. You've got a note here, David, that Joe Ryan's line doesn't accurately reflect how well he pitched. I think it more reflects how poorly people played behind him.
What's most frustrating about this game is the Twins only have 1 registered error, when I feel like it should have been 4 or 5 when it was all said and done. I just think that Joe Ryan pitched well, and the hits that were made against him, Dan, they were weak contact, like really weak contact. There was so much weirdness in this outing for Ryan. I would have sworn that Griffin Jax was on the mound for the majority of these
I thought
pitches,
you might bring him up. Yeah, absolutely. This is a Jacksonian game. Like for poor Joe Ryan. There was the top of the first. Runner at second. Eddie Julien knocks the ball down. There's obviously not a play at first in the situation. So he throws to get the runner who was sent home. And he can't even make a throw in the air to Vasquez from, it's not short right. We can't call it short right. It's just past the infield. And he one hops. And I'm sorry, a catcher should not be counted on there to make a difficult catch, I would say, on a bouncer there and then make the tag.
Yeah, I think that the throw was bad. I still think that Vasquez should have been at least to get a glove on it,
yeah,
to knock it down so it didn't get by him. But granted, that's why you have guys backing up the catcher. But this was a bad play all around, Dan, and really disappointing because they definitely should have gotten the runner at home.
Yeah, and by the way, they did lose this game 5-4. It was a bit of it was a dreary start to the series, I guess, and just more bad plays after that.
Yeah, top of the third, Meadows walks on a terrible ball call. If you look this up, if I just showed you the chart, you would say say it's a strike 100% of the time. It wasn't like a close pitch. It's like, oh man, they really missed that one. No, it was more or less middle. But so Meadow walks, then there's a bloop single by Perez, which scores Meadow, and then Perez steals second, and then a seeing eye single gets Perez home. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, just some bad bounces for Joe Ryan in this outing.
Yeah, top of 6. He gives up a leadoff triple, just 84 pitches. Rocco keeps him in, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But then, of course, there's a single to score the run. Another single gets an out. You're going to talk more about that conversation a little bit later. The bottom of the 6th, the Twins do finally get some guys on base, but they're gifted. Runners in second and third because the right fielder dropped the ball, and then Kirilloff and Larnach both strike out, but Buxton... a double that we will come back to.
We will come back to Byron Buxton's double here.
But a key play because it tied the game at the time. And so we're thinking, okay, this is a great start to the series if the Twins can eke out a win that they really had no business not winning.
Yeah, they definitely should have beaten this Tigers team, which is not good, but appears to be just postseason caliber at this rate, Dan, compared to the Twins. But top 8, if you just watch Griffin Jack's performance, you would think Joe Ryan and Griffin Jack's, it was some sort of Freaky Friday situation, I think, where they must have switched bodies because Griffin Jacks had a great outing and he worked out of a couple of jams here, but I mean, he pitched really well. And then top 9, we're going to talk about the mess that Thielbar caused in the top 9 to really take away the opportunity this team had to win. Other than that, Dan, let's go on to game 2.
Game 2, a great sequence from Byron Buxton here from a base running standpoint here. So bottom of the 2nd, Buxton doubles, advances to third on a wild pitch, and then he scores on a fly out to left because Green had to dive. And so it wasn't that deep of a ball, but the fact that he read that ball well, it's a play that a lot of other guys aren't going to be able to score on, but Byron Buxton is able to, I think, in that speed. And this was the game of sack flies.
Yeah, that's all they did, Dan. They kept hitting sack flies. It is funny if you look at the box score and you see sack flies like Castro, Jeffers, Larnach, like you think it's the lineup card. You don't think it's just who hit a sack fly, Dan.
They get another one in the bottom of the 3rd when Martin hits a double. Julian grounds out to the right side. A nice line by Chris Atterbury after that play. He said that Eddie Julian should have gotten the hockey assist, kind of the second assist there for the RBI because Jeffers hit the sack fly to bring him in. But I think this is the kind of play that the Twins are going to need in the absence of Correa, in the absence of Lewis. Like, they're going to have to be able to move runners and win games, I guess, like this when you only score, a few runs. They end up winning this game 4-3.
I mean, honestly, have we seen a blowout win for this Twins team that didn't become a blowout win? Like the last game, when Wallner hit his one hit that he got a homer against a position player against the Tigers, like that 11-run game, Dan, was the only blowout of the season. And it wasn't a blowout because that was an extra innings, Dan.
I know. And there were more plays here. So in the bottom of the 4th, the Twins could have had more here. A really nice double play turned by Javi Baez.
Yeah.
It's a Miranda grounder that Baez gets to. He kind of flips it to second, and then a really nice throw to first. And so, the Tigers avoided damage. And then errors helped the Twins out again in the bottom of the 5th. But a terrible strike 3 call on Eddie Julian. I know that Eddie Julian doesn't want to swing at baseballs. Like, his shtick is to, he wants to take 6 pitches and hope that 4 of them are balls. But the Twins end up getting a couple more there, and they have a 4-run lead, and I was feeling like maybe this is a lead the bullpen can actually hold.
Well, it's not even necessarily the bullpen all the time that's struggling, right? Like, it's always a mixture. No one is performing well at the same time. But I do want to note on Eddie Julian, Bally Sports North tweeted this stat line about Eddie Julian and how he has a great eye at not swinging at pitches outside of the zone. Like, he's top in the MLB. And it's like, that's because he doesn't swing at balls in the zone either. Like, it should be an easy category. If you or I, Dan, were in the majors, we would lead that category, I bet, as far as balls not swung on. Really? Because if you never swing the bat, you can lead that category with not much effort.
Okay, so this is a bigger discussion about Eddie Julian that we don't have time to have. But, I do think that he's going to grow in this. I think he's going to recognize that he has to swing at some more pitches. It's good to have a good eye, but yeah, he's getting a little bit too cute up there. And speaking of getting too cute, we're going to talk more about the bottom of the 7th a little bit later when Rocco is doing some pinch hitting things that I think are mistakes. It doesn't work out. The Twins don't add any runs, but they are able to hold on to this game. And Bailey Ober was great. Once again, David, that Kansas City start continues to look like a fluke.
Something was weird. Again, he had to be tipping his pitches or something. We sort of buried the lead in this one. We should have started with this, Dan. I think we're so disappointed in this team, it's easy to look at the negatives. But my goodness, Bailey Ober, 6 innings pitched, only 2 hits, 1 earned run, 6 strikeouts. The guy looks dominant, Dan. And even got some love on Twitter from MLB.com, who posted his last 3 starts. He's been absolutely phenomenal.
I kind of want to separate, and we'll talk about Louis Varland a little bit later, but I actually want to separate Louis Varland and Chris Paddock's starts because I feel like, and we'll get to this in game 3 a little bit too, I'm worried that the bullpen is going to get like overworked for those 2 starts because the top 3 have been so good. Lopez, Ryan, Ober, what a great 1, 2, 3. I haven't looked around the league for this exactly, but they've got to be, one of the most reliable top 3 so far.
Thus far in the season, it's just disappointing that their win totals are lacking compared to the quality of pitching that they put forth.
Last thing about this game before we move on, the Twins had 3 sacrifice flies for the first time in a game since 2020. Justin Morneau pointed that out on the broadcast. And again, that's the way they're going to have to win these games. Now, David, you were at game 3, which the Twins lost 6-1 in very disappointing fashion. Was anybody there to watch it with you?
No. They had closed the upper deck. They'd pushed everybody to the lower bowl, which would make sense if the Wolves were actually having a second playoff game, but they weren't, Dan. There's no Vikings. There's no T-Wolves. It was beautiful weather. It was 60 and sunny. Like, I was in the sun. I was too warm in a sweatshirt. What are we doing here that you can't bring fans out to the ballpark on a beautiful Sunday afternoon when there's no football and no basketball to contend with?
That's what happens when you win 7 out of 20 games, I think, so far on the season. Now, I would have loved to be there with you because some of the things that you witnessed here would have felt very familiar to me, though not the valet parking. I haven't gotten valet. This was like a random, like a drawing that you won or something like that?
So for season ticket holders, you like submit this wish list, and there's like 3 tiers of wish lists, and the first one's like, hey, you get to take a trip with the team, and they put you up in a fancy hotel and stuff, and then it goes like further down the list, and all the way at the bottom of that list, Dan, is valet parking in the players lot. This is the second time I've gotten this benefit, actually, which I wouldn't have picked. It's fun, and it's interesting. However, Dan, my wife was with me. It was a rare date game, which was really nice. She brought her knitting along, for the record, so she was knitting for most of the game. But my wife, I find her very humorous,
Hold on.
obviously.
Does she bring your knitting on all dates? Just in case when the conversation lulls at all?
I have a podcast, Dan. The conversation never lulls. It's not always interesting, but there's never a lull, Dan. But in this instance, it seems fair, right? Because she likes watching baseball, but she's kind of there for the atmosphere, and so we can chat and whatnot. It's not so much about her for watching the game, but for me, it's very important to me. Anyway, my wife turns to me in the first inning after Louis Varland's given up a couple runs. The bases are loaded, and she goes, maybe we should have told the valet to keep it running.
That's a pretty good one.
Which
there.
I thought was a pretty good line.
That's a very good line.
Loved it.
How many rows of knitting did she get done, I think, during this terrible game?
So she's knitting Frog and Toad, so little dolls and whatnot, and I think she's working on their waistcoats. So I don't know. I think she got one done, and she's working on a second one. It's hard to keep track, Dan.
Anyway, another thing that you have in a note here, you texted this, and it got me angry enough. This kind of dude bro thing bothers me so much, David, when people ruin the spirit and the fun of baseball for children.
I was pretty surprised about this. So Green for the Tigers is playing in left field, and there's a young kid wearing a Tigers jersey in left field bleachers, a couple of sections over from where we sat. Green's trying to throw the ball to this kid, and a mid-40s Twins fan intercepts the ball. He has to reach over in order to get the ball, and the fans let this guy have it a little bit because he doesn't want to give the ball up to the kid. But Green is he has his hands up in the air come on, bro. Everybody knows what was supposed to happen here. This kid was supposed to catch it. It was supposed to be this magical time, and instead this mid-40s, not even a dude bro, this guy should have known better. This is a did bro, right? So it's like the past tense. You should give the ball to that kid. And what I don't understand about that, Dan, is it wasn't a home run ball. It wasn't even a foul ball. I couldn't understand this on a foul ball. On a home run ball, I could understand you not coughing it up to a kid, especially depending who hit it. But in this instance, a player tossed you a ball. It's not science. It's just a baseball. Go to Walmart and buy one for $4.95. What are you doing, sir?
Terrible. This is terrible. David, I'm not a confrontational person, right? I confront people with my words rather than with my actions, but that would have been a spot. I would have brought some backup and said, hey guys, can we go talk to this gentleman and get this Tigers fan a baseball, for goodness sake?
Yeah, this was a rough one to watch, Dan. And then actually, funnily enough, later, Austin Martin in the bottom of the ninth hits his first major league home run, and a guy caught it. Now, this guy I respect because, the security and the representative, the Twins rep who's scanning tickets at the top, they come down because they want the ball because it's Austin Martin's first home run ball. And guy, Dan, I saw. Now, I couldn't hear them, but the body language was quite clear. This man was willing to give up this baseball, but he wanted in no uncertain terms what he was receiving in return. And I was curious, Dan, this isn't a segment, but I'm curious, if you caught the first home run ball of a player, just Austin Martin in this instance, what would you ask in return?
Oh, that's a great question. I would want Austin Martin t-shirts for my children, like through the ages, you know, so like they could like always have an Austin Martin shirt. And then I would want like a signed Austin Martin something. I think I'd want a bat more than a jersey, actually. And I think I'd be good with that.
I think asking for a signed bat and a signed ball and a set of Champions Club seats for a game. Yeah. I think that's not outlandish.
No, that's not.
That would be my ask. I think I thought about this a lot on the car ride home. My wife was knitting then too. Maybe it is me. Uh-oh. But anyway, so I think that's what I would ask for. And I just wonder what that guy ended up getting. I know that a few weeks ago we had a story about Mookie Betts signing a bat for a Dodgers fan who caught an opposing player's first home run ball. I kind of wonder, could you be like, hey, could I get a Correa signed bat, not an Austin Martin one? Like, I don't know, is that frowned upon?
I would just want the player. You know, I don't want to presume that Austin Martin will turn out to be nothing, which I suppose is possible. Twins prospects have burned out before, like Bobby Kilty. But I think, yeah, I would want something Austin Martin. And you know what? Well, he's gonna show up in a later segment. We'll see. The sky's the limit on Austin Martin right now.
I do want to know what the Twins team's response would be to you saying, I would like shirts continually for my children as they age. Like they would look at you like you were insane.
I want like all the sizes right now. That's what I want, right? And so that I can set them aside.
The way you said it made it sound like it was like every 6 months they're sending you a new Austin Martin shirt. And you have like 80 kids, Dan. That's pretty expensive.
I want the full ration now, and then we can just pass them down to children because the story will come with it.
It's a genealogy, man. And now, kids, it's time for the story of Dad catching Austin Martin's home run. But I can just see you like around a bonfire and all of your children are wearing Austin Martin t-shirts. It's like 30 years later. It's like your kids are grown. And now it's the annual retelling of the story.
I'll have the baseball bat with me. It'll be great.
Folks, can you tell we don't want to talk about this baseball team?
I know. We got to move on here.
We do. Anyway, this was a rough outing from Varland. We'll talk about that later. Team went 0 for 6 with runners in scoring position. It was embarrassing. And then there were two things I wanted to point out really quick before we get to our segments. Eddie Julian made a couple of really good plays at second base, which again, kind of is counter-Canadian. It's like counter-cultural, you know, when he's playing good in the warmth, he should be good in the cold, Dan. And then secondly, top 7, there's a deep ball that bounces off the wall that Martin couldn't get a handle on, and Buxton backs him up, but pretty lazy on getting the ball in, and it allowed the Tigers to score another run that I think maybe they could have had a play at home had Buxton hustled.
I don't like that. The lack of hustle from Buxton is a theme that's going to come up a little bit later.
All right, well, with that, Dan, let's go ahead and jump into our segments.
Touch 'em all, Kirby Puckett! Puckett's Picks winner.
So again, I'm annoyed that Hogs is winning this with 4 points. He wins with Byron Buxton, and good on him, right? That's going to be great. 4 points, though, is all he gets. The listeners picked Jeffers, who have 2. I have 0. Again, I'm hovering right around 0 for the last couple series. And then you had Jose Miranda, who we thought was going to be great again, and he had -1. Trevor Larnach ends up being the team high, go figure, with 7 points, and so the bonus point does not land. How about you give us the season standings?
Yeah, so season standings now, Hogs is in the lead with 3.5 points. I'm in second with 2. You're in third, Dan, with 1.5. And the listeners are in fourth place with 1 point. I'm not going to read the point score, Dan. It's a little early to even be looking at that. All that matters are the season wins. And I hope, for our sake, Dan, someone besides Hogs wins this next series.
He's got 28 points. I'll just say that. That's a lot more. It's almost twice as much as, well, anyway, we're not going to go into the details, but we will go on to Beast versus Bench.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
I'm going to go with Trevor Larnach. There are not a lot of good options here. Ober deserves a shout out, certainly, because he pitched so well in game 2. But I am going to go with Trevor Larnach because this is a guy, Dan, who this is an opportunity that he needs to make the most of. The Twins didn't call him up because of injury. They called him up because Matt Wallner was so terrible. His only hit came against a position player. So Larnach comes up in this series, goes 3 for 7 with 3 RBI and 3 strikeouts. 3 strikeouts from Larnach, a guy who notoriously cannot hit breaking balls, is not terrible for a 3-game series. I think that he could really, Dan, make a statement that he deserves to be on this roster.
It's telling, too, that he's been batting in the top half of the lineup here. A theme throughout this episode is going to be just how much injuries have really hurt this team. But yeah, I think that's a really good choice. I went with Austin Martin. He was 2 for 4 in game 2. He didn't play in game 1. And then in game 3, he hit his first major league home run. He didn't strike out. The guy's making good contact. He looks like he should be up here. And I think if by season's end, Austin Martin and Brooks Lee have established themselves as major major leaguers, I think that's going to be a victory for this team.
Totally agree. And one thing about Martin also, he had another hit robbed from him. It was 114 off the bat today, but the pitcher just snagged it, which is shocking that he could react as fast as he did.
And if that single goes through, it's with the bases loaded, that changes the whole complexion of that baseball game. So it was a shame that didn't go.
Quite disappointing. So I'm going to give it to Thielbar, and Thielbar didn't pitch well in game 3, but in game 1 specifically, Dan, he came in, it was a mess. So Meadows singles to right, and then Thielbar, he's a lefty. First of all, you should have a decent pickoff move to first base. He threw it in the stands, more or less, Dan. It was a ridiculous throw. And so Meadows advances then, and then they intentionally walked Canha, who had a 0 for 4 cooking, to get to Perez, who was 2 for 4. And I just don't understand this rookie. Yeah, I get he's a rookie, and I get that the matchup, the lefty-righty matchup is what you want there. However, that's the hot hand. You really want to intentionally walk a guy who's 0 for to get to a guy who's having a really good night? Anyway, so he singles, and the run scores 5-4 Tigers, and that's how this one ends. Really disappointed that Caleb Thielbar hasn't come back with the same intensity that he had last season.
And that's on Rocco a bit too, right? For that walk. There's a lot that we can leave at the feet of Rocco here, I think, in this game. We'll talk more about that in that segment. I'm going to go with Varland for my bench. We have called for him, and maybe it was premature in some sense to say that he ought not be starting anymore when Simeon Woods Richardson looked really good in one start. It's time. Louis Varland got roughed up. He was throwing around the zone. He wasn't trying to throw in the zone very much. He doesn't have it right now. If he's going to be a starter, he's got to go back to AAA and reestablish himself as a starter. I don't mind him being up with the major league team if he's going to be a 6th or 7th inning guy out of the bullpen. But right now he's not doing this, and he's damaging the team. This team cannot just throw away victories in the way that they are right now, hoping that Louis Varland's going to get it figured out when you have better options right now to bring up and use.
That is the question. I'm curious, once he gets sent down, which is inevitable at this point, I think, does he get sent back down and they say, hey, we gave you a chance. You clearly couldn't do it. You're going to go to the bullpen or you're not going to pitch. Like, those are your options. I am not throwing away my shot. No, Dan, the sounder should have said, I am throwing away my shot.
Yes, well,
because that's the way that Varland has treated it. And I feel bad for the kid. Obviously, he's from St. Paul, so you love the Minnesota hometown story. But there comes a point, Dan, where the team has to move on. And I get that not a lot of guys on the team are playing well, but they haven't had a shot in any of his starts thus far.
Not at all. And honestly, even today, they had a decent shot, but that was only after Louis Varland left and the bullpen kind of locked it down. Well, hey, let's go on here to Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
I'm going to go with leaving Ryan in game 1, top 6. I think after that triple, Dan, you got to pull him. I get that run is likely going to score unless you have someone come in who basically strikes out the side. But I do think at that point, Ryan's a guy who early, he might give up a home run, right? He might have a mistake or two, but as he gets worn down, it's clear. As soon as he starts giving up contact, you pull him. You pull him immediately. You don't see if he can figure it out, because when Joe Ryan makes mistakes, Dan, they're big mistakes. It's almost like they're intentional. But in this instance, when he's giving up hard contact and it wasn't on a mistake pitch, the other team hasn't figured out it's time to pull him.
I guess I don't agree. I guess I didn't mind leaving him there because, again, as you said, that run's probably going to score. No matter what. I think if it gets a further out of hand, yes, absolutely. You have guys like Louis Varland pitching a little bit later in this series. Like, I think you maybe need to save some of your bullpen arms for a little bit later with Joe Ryan, who I think Rocco has proven to have a longer leash with him to let him work things out. For some reason, Joe Ryan is allowed to pitch a little bit later into games. But I guess, admittedly, some of my perspective comes from the fact that it only was that one run that scored, and it wasn't really what doomed the Twins at the end of the day.
Well, that's fair. What do you have for Rocco, Dan?
Oh, man. David, game 2. It's the bottom of the 7th inning, and Rocco gets cute. And I'm tired of this. This doesn't make any sense. You are already short Correa and Lewis right now, so you really don't have arguably your 3 and 4 hitters in the lineup. What you do have is Alex Kirilloff and Trevor Larnach, who have both played pretty well lately. Kirilloff a little bit more of over the long haul, Trevor Larnach in the short term, and instead of leaving them in against the lefty, fine, I get that. Whatever. He brings in Carlos Santana, who has not proven to be able to hit anything at all, right? He can play first base, and that's grand. So bring him in when you're up 6 runs in the bottom of the 7th inning, okay. But you're not. You need a run here. And you leave him in, and he quickly gets out. And then you bring in Manuel Margot. Manuel Margot must be a nice guy. Wonderful. He showed up it was like he had a time machine or a teleporter, and he was able to get from Arizona to Florida inside of a day. And that's great during spring training. But he's not a solution. He's not a step up. I would arguably just have a AAA guy playing right now instead of Manuel Margot, right? And this is the deeper discussion about the Twins management and just the way that they left this team. In any case, you bring him in for Trevor Larnach, who's already been playing pretty well, and he is out quickly too. Like, this is just a maddening scenario. Why are you doing this, Rocco? These are your 3 and 4 hitters. Not to mention, it's a close baseball game. You may need them in the bottom of the 9th inning, and you don't care? You're like, no, this is the moment.
Fans want an ejection. There he goes. And that was Gardy's gripe.
This is what's going to bury me. It's going to be the pinch hits. does that make any sense to you other than being a lefty-righty obsessionist, Rocco? Unbelievable. Because you could have used the run. And who knows, Alex Kirilloff, he's hitting the ball everywhere right now. There's no reason to think he's not going to be able to hit a lefty. Manuel Margot and Carlos Santana, I know Carlos Santana had a hit in game 3, which was another spot where they should have sent Castro earlier to try to steal second. That would have mattered. But Rocco is not managing well right now.
No, would you say, though, Dan, do you think Alex Kirilloff is growing the beard to compensate for his arm that's a little shorter than the other?
Maybe if he grows enough, they can harvest it and then reconstitute it as calcium bone and then reinsert it, kind of like Wolverine or something like that. I don't know.
Of course, Alex Kirilloff, our beloved T-Rex. But with that, Dan, let's keep moving here. Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
Buxton, Dan, in game 2, he finally gets a hit with runners in scoring position. But here's the thing. He's so shocked that he made contact with runners on base and the ball is going to be in fair territory and not caught by a fielder, Dan. As opposed to running, Byron Buxton watches. And with how he was watching, Dan, honestly, you could have pulled out a lazy boy and I think he would have sat in it and watched it a little bit closer. Because he sat there, watched it the entire way, had no desire to start running. Didn't have interest in making the trip around the bases at all. He knew it was a home run until he knew that it wasn't. And I get it. It was a stand-up double. It didn't lead to an out. And at best case, probably a triple. But honestly, with how high that ball was hit, that should have been an out had the Tigers left fielder played it correctly. Buxton might have been able to make it home by the time the throw came back into the plate had he been running after he made contact, Dan.
He stares at that for longer and longer. Like, that is maddening. Who's to say he couldn't have scored? I totally think that that's possible there, and that, again, changes the tenor of that entire baseball game.
What do you have here for your moment?
Maybe this is a weird thing. I went with Griffin Jax closing out game 2 with a 1-2-3 inning. It was a 1-run game. Loved the way that he pitched in that inning. He looks really good. We talked about him before, but it does give me, just from a bullpen standpoint here, if Griffin Jax is able, let's say even in game 1, to be able to handle, one of those earlier innings or put a fire out, if they get Duran back, and Duran is beginning a rehab assignment on Tuesday, so you got to think, that next week when they go on the road, he's going to be back with them. This bullpen has already been pretty good, but if you can get Duran back and you can move Jax into those higher leverage situations earlier, I think this is a really good sign if the Twins are going to turn this around, that Griffin Jax looks as good as he does in this role again.
And he hasn't had the weird stuff happen this season. For whatever reason, that's gone to all the other pitchers that the Twins have to offer. But Griffin Jax, it just seems like normal baseball plays when he's on the mound, Dan.
Well, we have more roster questions here in Mauer's Musing.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's Musings.
Do you think, Dan, with the struggles that Thielbar has had, and I get that Alcala is not a lefty, but do you think there's a part of this Twins team that regrets sending down Alcala?
Yes, and I'm just putting it together. All of the Minnesotans on this team are being terrible right now, right? Louis Varland, Matt Wallner, again, like as you pointed out, I think it sounded like exaggeration. He literally only had one other hit aside from that hit off a position player. And then now Caleb Thielbar too, who's kind of that, that wily veteran on this team. He doesn't look very good. Right now, he and Cody Funderburk are kind of interchangeable. So yeah, I think that doesn't look very good right now.
I do wonder if they will make a move before the White Sox series starts tomorrow. That seems like the likely culprit. I mean, you can't send Thielbar down, but you got to do something, right? I mean, Bowman probably, or Sands, I guess, depending on his option count, but they have to do something to get another arm out of the pen who can get guys out.
But Sands and Bowman have been all right in their role. Now they've been in,
I think,
low leverage.
Sorry, this is more about a number of options and flexibility with their roster assignments and less about, hey, they haven't pitched well, let's send them down.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the maddening things about baseball decisions is that it so often does. It comes down to the number of options rather than how well you're playing. That's why Alcala gets sent down in the first place. They need him back up here. You need all of the best talent that you have right now when you are so depleted right now. And then Topa's going to come back, hopefully not long after Duran. So you got to think, that at some point here, this bullpen it's ironic because the bullpen has been a position of strength and it's only going to get stronger.
What do you have here for your musing, Dan?
Last year, we were wondering if Max Kepler was even going to be part of this baseball team much longer. But is he now kind of the short-term savior of this offense? And how much pressure do you think is on Max Kepler to be able to help this team?
I think there'd be more pressure if he had been playing really well before he went on the IL, but he hadn't. So I think, had he been batting 400, because it was really early in the season when he went on the IL, but he wasn't. So I don't think there'll be as much pressure as there is on someone like Royce Lewis or Carlos Correa, who I think that there's a lot of Twins fans out there who are expecting those two guys when they return. If this team doesn't win 19 out of every 20 games, Twins fans are going to riot because that's why this team has suffered so much, is because Correa and Lewis are on the IL. Max Kepler is not that guy, Dan.
But then who's going to get sent down now?
That's just as good a question. I don't know, because Larnach has held his own. I mean, Miranda, maybe. I don't really know how that all shakes out, but I can tell you that Santana has been poor, but Max Kepler's not playing first base. And so, I don't know. Who are your other options? You don't want to send Martin down because he's been one of the few guys who's been productive. And what sort of message does that send if you're sending him down?
The guy I'd like to send down is Manuel Margot, but this Twins management team, and this was pointed out by Provis and Atterbury, I think, or one of the two, was that the signings haven't worked, right? Carlos Santana hasn't been good. Manny Margot, who I've already railed into, has not been good. Like, why did they sign them? If they're going to be this bad and are they just going to keep them out of pride? Like, is this a Joey Gallo-ish moment? At least Joey Gallo occasionally hit a towering home run and went 4 for 4 against the Phillies, right? Manuel Margot hasn't done that, nor has Carlos Santana.
Yeah, I don't know why they're insisting on giving these guys playing time when clearly they're inadequate at their positions.
Yeah, well, it comes down to money, I guess, a little bit here. I didn't mean to get so salty about ownership, but this is frustrating, right? Because they have no margin of error coming into the season, and then Lewis gets hurt and Correa gets hurt. Hopefully he's coming back soon, but still, this has been a rough month.
Yeah, it's been a rough time to be a Twins fan, Dan. And a quick note to that. If you're listening to this show, my goodness, thank you, because we haven't really seen a dip in our numbers, which is shocking to me that you folks are still listening. So thank you so much for the continued support. I don't know that we deserve it, so I hope you find us entertaining at the very least.
All right, David, let's go on to the series grades.
Series grades.
Can I go first? I promise I can be quick.
Okay.
The advanced retreat, this is a 3 out of 10. This was a step back in a winnable series, and it was mostly because of things that I think were entirely within the Twins' control. Just playing better baseball, which relates to my other one. But to lose 2 of 3 to the Tigers here, to open up a key stretch of 16 games against mid to poor teams, it's a bad sign. So I gave him a 3 out of 10 there. And then the well-played baseball. Man, game 1 was terrible. That was some of the worst baseball we've seen the Twins play in a long time. I think, there's an element of game 2 where they got better, kind of playing some small ball, but I don't know. There's just not a lot of great baseball plays being made. Buxton kind of watching himself, hoping for a home run was not great, and his poor decision in not throwing the ball back in faster to try to get somebody out. Like, it just isn't inspiring baseball. So I gave him a 2 out of 10 there. That's a 5 out of 20. You cut it in half, 2.5 out of 10. That's 25%. This was an F. I didn't even have to put this is one of those things that you look at it and you're like, well, there's no way that even on the rubric that's passing.
I can just tell. Anyway, I'm going to give them an F as well. They went 2 for 24, Dan, with runners in scoring position. And honestly, they won a game. So I feel a little bit bad about giving them an F. However, prior to this series, if you'd been playing well, I might have given you a D here, and maybe you just had a down series. But you have been playing so poorly. And I said at the beginning of the season, Dan, in the season preview show, I said, you have to rack up some wins early because this schedule gets very difficult very quickly. So you have to beat these bad teams. Even with the injuries that you have, you had to be at least playing 500 baseball before you have to go see the Yankees and you have to see the Astros. Like, you have to be better than you're being right now. The Astros are a bad example right now, but I'm sure that the Twins will help them get right back on track, Dan.
Well, that's a good segue into our look around the league and Herbie's headline.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbie pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
So, Dan, I don't know if you have taken a look at Miguel Sano's MLB
I've been watching
stats
this.
page.
Yeah, this is great.
This is honestly, okay, here's the thing. I get that there was no way that the Twins should have kept Miguel Sano on their roster. And we're going to see him pretty soon when the Twins play the Angels. And I am curious how those hellos will go, especially because Miguel Sano will look around the room at the Twins and he'll see a team that is struggling mightily. And the Angels, granted, they're not a very good baseball team either. But what Miguel Sano can say is, I have a better batting average than the entirety of the Twins roster. I have an OPS that you could basically string together 4 or 5 Twins players, and they wouldn't match Miguel Sano's OPS. Miguel Sano is currently hitting 300 with a 390 on base percentage and an 810 OPS, Dan. Call it what you will. It's not David Ortiz. Stop saying that this is David Ortiz. But there's something to be said that the Angels could do something to get Miguel Sano to drop all the weight and pay more attention than the Twins just couldn't figure out how to do that.
Miguel Sano has 1 home run, and you know what? That's one more than Byron Buxton right now, David. So good on Miguel here. I'm excited to watch these games when they play the Angels here coming up. I hope that he looks good. And then you also have a note here on Shohei Ohtani that is actually baseball related.
Yeah, this is amazing. We can't have this segment without talking about Ohtani, it feels like. But Ohtani passes Hideki Matsui's MLB record for home runs by a Japanese-born player. And I was a little bit surprised that Ichiro didn't have more home runs. So Shohei has 176. Matsui has 175. I have the notes here. I was going to have you guess, but I put the notes in the sheet, so
I
that's
couldn't
not
guess
helpful.
it.
Suzuki is 117. And then, Dan, I asked you who you thought was fourth before I posted in the stats here, which I knew you wouldn't guess who was fourth because I didn't think that you could name a fourth-born Japanese player. But it's Kenji Johima at 48, Dan.
Yeah, and don't forget Tadahito Iguchi at 44 for fifth. I would have had him.
Yes,
if you had given me 5 guesses. He would have been the other one here. Again, remarkable. He's a remarkable baseball player who chooses his friends poorly, as it turns out.
Yeah, so you don't think he bet on himself to break
I don't
that
think
record,
so. No, but that's another thing about these. It's the Acuna brothers, right? And who's going to get more steals? That's a separate issue here. We've already talked about that.
I suppose. Okay, with that, Dan, let's go here to Puckett's picks for a White Sox series that the Twins desperately need to win because the White Sox are basically the only team worse than the Twins.
And we'll see you tomorrow night. Puckett's picks.
So listeners are going to take Larnach off the board. I get to choose second. I take Jeffers. And so, Dan, it goes to you.
I'll stick with Buxton. One of these days, he's going to hit a home run, right? And who else am I supposed to pick? He's one of the most proven players on here. He is at least healthy. But if you had told me, David, before the season, that of the big 3 Twins players, that Byron Buxton was going to be the one who was healthy, no way would I have agreed with you there.
No, probably not. And then Hogs rounds it out by taking Martin. Not a bad pick. I don't know, Dan. I hope they can win a few of these games because I'm getting real tired of watching this team lose baseball games.
The last thing I will say, let's say they can get closer to 500 at the end of the month. It is a long baseball season. I was looking at the standings in the past. Teams have dug out of holes like this before. It is not the end, but there are some changes that I think this team does need to make. Like, good teams will adapt. So let's see. Let's see if they adapt.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and send us out, Dan. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win and find our Min for the Win Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, 2 avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.